The NFL Combine has come and gone. Players ran, they jumped, they even moved weight up and down. But the biggest news that actually came from the Combine wasn't on the field. It was actually some of the transactions and notes and rumors that we heard from coaches, players, and agents alike. So today we're going to go through the biggest news from the Combine and see where that might lead us ahead of free agency and beyond. So myself, Ian Hartitz, joined by the one, the only, Dwain, the Rock McFarland, here again making you guys proud on the Fantasy Life show. But Dwain, again, biggest news from the weekend is undoubtedly Deebo Samuel being traded to the Washington Commanders in return for just a fifth-round pick. Of course, Deebo Samuel making quite a bit more than your normal fifth-round pick, so that is why the draft capital is, understandably low. So, look, first reaction is, again, how the heck did the Cowboys, actually convince themselves to trade a fourth-round pick to Jonathan Mingo? But that aside, Dwain, what was your first, initial reaction to the news?
Well, look, we don't know if Deebo's washed or not. We can talk about that in a minute, but I think it's hard to debate that this was probably like the nut landing spot for Deebo. Like, I don't think it could be better because you've got a young ascending quarterback in Jaden Daniels. You don't have immense target competition. You have one other good player there in Terry McLaurin. It's not like he's getting a 30% target share. And then you look at the way that Cliff Kingsbury likes to run his offense. Ian, nobody in the league likes to run more stuff around the line of scrimmage. He's right there with the league leaders every single year. So when you think about the screen game and you think about what that could do for the RPO game with Jaden Daniels and how complementary really Deebo's skill set is to Terry McLaurin, like he's not going to be running the routes that Terry runs, right? He's just not going to be. So I feel like if he has a chance, like this is a great spot for Deebo. Everything really fits. Now, I think the big question is, can Deebo Samuel really return to that level that we got used to seeing for about a 2 to 3 year stretch? And that's going to be the biggest unknown. But this is way better than him landing somewhere where we didn't like the landing spot either. I would say here, Deebo definitely has a chance. If he gets motivated, like maybe it's a revenge season for him, whatever we want to call it, like he has a shot here to produce fantasy numbers.
And that's the thing worth remembering with Deebo. It's not like since the moment he, entered the league back in 2019, he's just been lights out year after year. I mean, the sophomore campaign in 2020 was actually pretty disappointing and yes, influenced by injuries. But look what happened last season, Dwain. We had actually the September calf issue that, ended up sidelining him for one game, I believe. And then we had the rib injury against the Cowboys with the pneumonia diagnosis going on that literally hospitalized the guy again for multiple days at a time. So I know. We still saw the, drop slant for a touchdown against the Rams there down the stretch. I'm not saying just because he was hospitalized in October that is 100% why he sucked in December. But again, Dwain, it's not like we're talking about a 34-year-old player, just years removed from the last time he was great. We're 1 year removed. And as much as we can say, it's a small sample size before pneumonia about how good, he was playing, well, it's a pretty small sample size afterwards as well when he wasn't playing as well. So again, we've seen this over the years, man. Just because you want to call someone washed because of literally an 8 to 10 week sample size doesn't mean they, are completely done with gas in their tank.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, he'll be 29.7. Yes, I'm going to keep using decimal points on ages, just like to the end, because it's like something nerdy that I would do. So, I mean, almost 30 years old when the season starts, but that's not in an area where you're like, oh my God, we're for sure he's going to hit a cliff. And to your point, like having the pneumonia last year, like we don't know for sure really how well was Deebo down the stretch. Now, you could also argue, man, Deebo's never healthy. It feels like it's always something. Typically, it's a soft tissue sort of injury that we're having to deal with, and we don't know if he's going to be 100% or not. He misses time quite often during the season. But yeah, when you look at him, I think it's really tough to say that, oh my gosh, we know for sure that Deebo has fallen off. I think we have to kind of lean that way because he is going to be 30 or almost 30 years old. We lean that way a little bit and say, okay, it's a little bit of a downgrade. But I think the folks that are out there that are certain that Deebo is washed, man, like I just can't get on board with that because a lot of the things that people are talking about, Ian, like Deebo's had problems with for forever, right? People talking about his separation versus man coverage, things like that. Deebo never did those things well. And that's why it's so important that he lands somewhere where he's in a scheme where we know they could actually give him a lot of the same type of looks that he was getting in San Francisco. And that's why that point, I think, is so important. The other thing is, remember, the league's running zone coverage on 70% of plays. Now, we know that like parts of that turns into man coverage depending on the kind of route concepts and combos and all that on a lot of those plays. It's the equivalent of man coverage. So 70% isn't a perfect number, but the bottom line is we got a lot of zone going on. And Deebo has always been the guy that gets the targets against zone for the 49ers. It was really Brandon Ayuk getting the targets against man coverage. So I think that like it could be pretty similar here with Deebo getting a lot of that zone underneath stuff. And then you have Terry McLaurin really taking on more of those man coverage targets like what we saw from Ayuk.
Again, not trying to say that the Commanders are getting prime Deebo or anything, but even the lesser version of him last year, Dwain, as a whole, not even, restricting ourselves to just the first 6 or so weeks of the season, still pretty good relative to a lot of other players after the catch. I mean, shout out Next Gen Stats and some of the work they do with yards, above expected. And Deebo, even in the down 2024, 7th among all wide receivers in yards after the catch, above expectation per reception. So let's assume, just for the sake of argument, that we're getting, a lesser version than what we saw in 2021 or 2023, but maybe not, the complete worst version of Deebo that we had going in 2024. Where do you think it kind of stacks up in the overall wide receiver landscape, Dwain? Because that's the other thing here. The days of using, a round 2 or round 3 pick on the guy are over. We're going to get a nice little discount in drafts here come August.
Yeah, I mean, right now you can draft Deebo more like a wide receiver 4. I'm down with that. I like drafting Deebo Samuel in that range. I'm not saying it's that you got to do it all the time, but I clearly think that he has upside from there. Like, would it surprise us if Deebo Samuel had a wide receiver 2 season? I think he really could. If you're having to pay a wide receiver 2 price tag, it would be a lot tougher. But knowing that you can get him as a wide receiver 4, wide receiver 5, it's going to be interesting to see what happens to his ADP in the next several days, right? Over on Underdog, DraftKings, some of these places where you're playing best ball to see what happens with it. But right now, I would say yes, I would be in on Deebo Samuel, and I would say like if I had to rank him today, we'll have a new set of rankings coming out here in a couple of weeks, and I'll be putting out my first version for the season. Ian, I know you've already got one version up. I would say borderline wide receiver 3, but definitely upside from there.
That's why I end up concluding in my immediate, Deebo Samuel reaction piece over on fantasylife.com. Similar sentiment from our fearless leader and overall, just leader of the Commanders fan base, Matthew Berry, and a quick little reaction vid he shot from a Florida party. Must be nice balling down there in the Gulf. So shout out Matthew Berry and shout out to you, Dwain, for having your rookie supermodel now live over at fantasylife.com. I know you've been in the lab over the course of the last, month, just ignoring your family, ignoring your friends, and just doing everything possible to help get everyone ready for this class. So going to have, some specific podcasts in the future, going through each and every running back and wide receiver, really getting the draft season. So make sure you guys check that out. But yeah, right now, go to fantasylife.com. Make sure you check out those supermodels because again, Dwain poured his heart and soul into those and truly is, some next gen awesome stuff through the industry. So enough on Deebo though, Dwain. Let's talk quickly though about kind of the ramifications of the Deebo trade over in San Francisco, because that's right. We now have, the 4-pronged wide receiver room down to 3. Brandon Ayuk recovering from an ACL and MCL injury could be out of commission for the first, month or so of the season. We'll see, modern technology, modern science, maybe he gets out there sooner rather than later, but it does seem like a potential pup candidate. Really, man, seems like great news for Jauan Jennings and Ricky Pearsall. Still going to be battling with George Kittle and CMC for targets. Not like this is now suddenly, a super less crowded offense, but Ricky Pearsall and Jauan Jennings got Dwain, guys who flashed at least for portions of last season, now with, one less guy in the offense to worry about.
Yeah, and I think we kind of laughed last year when Ricky Pearsall went to the 49ers and we're like, yeah, man, Ricky Pearsall could be really awesome if like Deebo Samuel got traded, Brandon Ayuk got hurt. It's like domino after domino happening for Ricky Pearsall. And you saw there were the rumors that the 49ers are open to trading Brandon Ayuk. So I don't know. It's weird. Like, over the last 2 years, they've seemed to be all in on the talent they have, but now suddenly changing their mind about it. So we could still see another domino fall. But at a minimum, to your point, Brandon Ayuk's going to take some time to get ramped up, at the beginning part of the season, even if he does eventually say mid-season reach that point where it's like, okay, we've got more back to normal with Brandon Ayuk, not quite what we were used to, but he takes over a lead role. That's going to leave the door open, though, early in the year for Jauan Jennings and Ricky Pearsall to really nail down roles. And that could actually make it problematic as far as how quickly they want to bring back Brandon Ayuk and how quickly they want to ramp up his playing time. Because we saw both of these guys this year in their moments flash. I mean, obviously, Jauan Jennings was the biggest of the two. We're talking about a guy that had target shares of 40%, 33%, 38%, 27, 29, 32, 27, 28. Are you kidding me? That's insane, man. I've never seen anything like that of a player that had been like a 15% targets per route player for their entire career for 4 or 5 years and suddenly turn into this. Like that is very rare, but he kept going. He kept doing it every single freaking week. So Juwan Jennings, man, I think he's locked into playing a huge role for this offense. Ricky Pearsall, obviously getting a big bump, with the news as well. You have to wonder, is he going to be the odd man out, though, once Ayuk's back as far as the two wide receiver sets? We can't say that for sure. I mean, they did spend a first-round pick on Pearsall, and weirder things have happened. Maybe they favor Pearsall over Juwan Jennings in his second year in the league. So with Ricky Pearsall, we never saw the consistency that we saw from Juwan Jennings, but he did toss up a 28% target share in week 17 when he went off for 28.7 fantasy points. Followed that up in week 18 with 18.9 fantasy points. So obviously those were 2 weeks where they were needing to lean on Ricky Pearsall, and he did come through. So in the moments that he was given to actually shine, he did. I think this is positive for both of them. I do lean more towards Juwan Jennings. I've seen other people in the industry, though, that feel opposite. Like, they like Ricky Pearsall more than Juwan Jennings. Very interested to see which side of the fence you fall on, though, if you had to choose between those two guys.
I had to pick. I think I'm leaning Jennings as the one who's just more likely to be on the field throughout the entire season, because he was already tough enough to get off in the first place because of how much of a badass blocker he's been. So I don't think either one of these guys is necessarily going to be, taking the quote unquote Deebo role, all of a sudden, getting these RB touches or bunches of screens. Probably more of a, committee approach. And maybe honestly, CMC is the one who gets taken off the field just a little bit more, getting guys like Jordan Mason or Elijah Mitchell, or even Isaac Guerrero. Most likely Isaac Guerrero. Those extra carries that, again, are now out the door with Deebo. So, hey, during the first month of the year with Ayuk out of the picture, honestly, Dwain, I could see Jennings and Pearsall both being guys that are, in those kind of lower end wide receiver 2 spots of the rankings. And, hey, even once Ayuk gets back, maybe they can hold on. But moral of the story, feeling good about, all the guys really in the San Francisco offense, because even last year, as bad as things were, still saw Brock Purdy, really working as one of the league's more efficient passers out there with all the injuries. So would expect him to continue keeping on, at least to a decent extent in 2025 and beyond. So again, that was the major news coming out of the combine, but there was plenty of other goodness, Dwain, and we will now start getting to that. Next up, with Matthew Stafford not going to the Giants, not going to the Raiders, instead signing an extension to stay home in LA with the Rams. So as we see with, a lot of these open contract negotiations or trade requests, sometimes, it is just a bit of smoke that ultimately doesn't, turn into a complete fire. And that is the case here. So first of all, Dwain, just great news for Puka Nacua. And let's face it, pretty great news for the Rams. Lest we forget, they had the ball, inside the Eagles' 25-yard line, down 6 with only a minute 30 left in that divisional round. Had some bad, just penalties come at the worst time possible, so they couldn't, pull off the upset or anything. But this is a team that just continues to ace seemingly every single draft pick out there. And again, we know we're getting with Puka, we know we're getting with McCarthy, but just having Stafford, who, let's face it, has done a better job enabling, all these wide receivers to have huge years, really just like the king of that, honestly. Having him there, whoever ends up being the wide receiver 2 in Los Angeles, going to be someone we should be paying attention to in Fantasyland.
Yeah, and right now, I mean, we've got Jordan Whittington sitting there on the roster. Like, he's kind of the dark horse because Demarcus Robinson's also not under contract. So Tutu Atwell is a free agent as well. So there's a lot of open seats here, especially if Cooper Kupp does end up getting moved. I know McVay basically said he's not committing to anything one way or the other, but we've already heard that they're trying to move Cooper Kupp. So I felt like that was a little bit more of, hey, I like Cooper Kupp. I probably handled the Jared Goff thing wrong, so not going to open my mouth on this one. But looking at the wide receiver 2 position, obviously, this is one of the very few places, Ian, where we will say if you just get on the field, like, there might be something happen for you. And for the most part, when we talk about wide receivers, we always talk about talent and like, hey, it's great. You could be out there running routes, but if you're not good, you're not going to get the targets. But when we talk about the 49ers to some extent that we just mentioned, and then when you talk about the Rams, these are the 2 teams that do seem to be able to manufacture these opportunities. Like, Tutu Atwell's been pretty good in his time whenever he's had to have spot starts and play a full role. We saw Jordan Whittington pop up and do a little bit as well. So I think these are all guys we got to keep an eye on. I'm assuming that the Rams are they're also going to do something in the draft, could do something in free agency, depending on, if they find a deal that they like. So I think there's obviously more dominoes to fall, and one of them could be one of those other guys returning to the team. I guess we can't completely rule out even Cooper Kupp coming back. So it will be very interesting. I think it's hard to say right now. If I had to pick someone, Jordan Whittington would be the name that I would be betting on if I'm doing best ball drafts right now, with late round kind of pick stuff. And you just kind of have to see where things sort out. I will say this, though. I know on Puka, it's like, great, we already know Puka's really good. But knowing this, Ian, knowing that you have Stafford, because it was at least a question when you created your original ranks, like, will he have Stafford? Who's going to be the replacement for Stafford that can impact things? But I could see people making a case for Puka Nacua being as high as the wide receiver 2 in fantasy football ranks. Like, I think he belongs in the very top tier. Interested in your thoughts. Do you feel like there's a tier break there, or do you think Puka belongs up there in that top 3 or 4?
So tough to move him past, either Jamar Chase or Justin Jefferson. But I think he's comfortably wide receiver 3 at this point, with all due respect to CeeDee Lamb and everything. But just, again, the Stafford-Puka connection. Now with Cooper Kupp seemingly out of the picture, I have been drafting him as the overall wide receiver 3. And honestly, someone I'm comfortable taking ahead of a lot of the running backs as well. I mean, probably Dwain, again, getting ahead of ourselves a little bit. But for me, Saquon, Bijan, Chase, Jefferson, and Puka, those CeeDee Lamb in there as well. Pretty, comfortable with that being the top 6 right now.
Yeah, I mean, I love all those plays. I think those are all, like, you feel great about any one of those picks. And I'm with you. Like, if you wanted to move Puka over Lamb, I think it's fine. If you want Lamb over Puka, I think that's also fine. I think Lamb's the better all-around wide receiver. If you put Lamb with the Rams, oh my God. Like, I think Puka's good, but I think CeeDee Lamb's a little bit better. But I do think that's a very comfortable top 6 though. And you're feeling really, I mean, honestly, you're walking away, with that first 6 pick, just thinking, okay, I have something that I can build around, and I feel really good about it.
To Dwayne's point, Jordan Whittington, though, looking like the potential, sneakier winner here. In 3 spots last season, he caught 6 passes for 62 yards, 7 for 89, and then 3 for 86, showcasing even as a returner, some of that yak goodness that we've seen, again, go a long way in Sean McVay's system. We'll see, again, what they have in store, though, for free agency and the draft. Another big news item from the weekend, Dwayne, we do have official word that Travis Kelce will not be retiring. He is going to be sticking around for at least one more season and fulfilling his contract. So I get it. Kelce was a bit of a shell of himself last year, had, career low marks in pretty much any efficiency measure, and, was knocked off his reign as the, tight end 1 in fantasy, but still found a way to finish as the tight end 7 in terms of PPR points per game. And God forbid we get a bit more wide receiver health in Kansas City, I could see some of that efficiency increasing if the Chiefs actually have, some field stretching talent out there to force defenses, away from loading the box as much as they have in recent years. So Travis Kelce, again, Dwayne, not sure we're going to be partying like it's 2019 or 2020 again, but is he still going to be someone that you're more than comfortable taking after maybe the top 4 or 5 players of the position?
Well, first, I just want to give a hat tip to Travis Kelce that I don't have to round. He will be 36.0. Like, he'll be 36. That's all I have to do is say 36 when the season starts next year. So obviously getting up there. Yards per route run have been dipping for the last 3 seasons, 2.23 down to 1.92 down to 1.43. Obviously, you could be like, Dwayne, you're a complete nerd. You could also just look at the fantasy points, and those have gone down as well, and you would be correct. But we like to kind of look and see, okay, does the underlying data really match up with what we're seeing in the box score for fantasy points? And it really does here. So I think there is reason to have some concerns about where Kelce is. But to your point, it is so hard to find players that can score any points at tight end in fantasy at times, that if we just have someone that we think can score some, we know Kelce, or we don't know it, but I don't think Kelce's going to completely disappear. We're just not going to have the ceiling that we got used to seeing. Now, I will say this, though, like, what if he does just have a year where he surprises everybody? Like, the odds of that happening are probably better than some other tight ends that we're going to be talking about later, and saying, hey, could this guy go off? So, I mean, you kind of got to put it, it's all relative. Like, what are the chances of Kelce actually outperforming what we think he's going to do versus some of these other guys? And it's probably closer than we think, even with his age, if they can get things clicking again in Kansas City. So, yeah, plenty of concerns around Kelce, but also going to be another name that's not going to be as expensive. You don't want to spend a premium pick anymore on Travis Kelce. But once you're past all that, then I think he's definitely in play for fantasy this season.
Do wonder if maybe we're just 1 year early on the, super Mahomes bounce back kind of eruption season. Because again, going back to week 1 last year, we thought we were getting Worthy coming in and being this, newfound field stretcher, fastest guy in combine history. We knew what Rashee Rice could offer in the underneath parts. And Marquise Brown seemed like the perfect, sort of number 3 receiver to do, more of those traditional, just be there, route running, DeMarcus Robinson type of guy, can, take the top off the defense, also fit in the intermediate areas of the field. And we just never got a single game with that actual trifecta out there. Seeing Xavier Worthy actually progress as the season went on, started doing really good things down the stretch. Again, we take that version of Worthy with a hopefully not suspended and not injured Rashee Rice. Big if there, I get it. Hollywood Brown rumored to be returning the Chiefs as well. Hopefully that's enough for Mahomes and company to at least get some semblance of explosiveness back in Kansas City. God forbid we get a running back in there that can pick up, 20 plus yards from time to time as well. So Kansas City, not exactly, writing them off after simply, one instance of 60 minutes of bad football. Travis Kelce, of course, still going to be a big part of that as well. So final note here, Dwayne, Trey McBride, Brock Bowers, George Kittle, Sam Laporta, TJ Hawkinson. Those are 5 that I think confidently we're going with over Travis Kelce. Tight end 6, sound about right? Or you still think guys like Mark Andrews, David Njoku, Jonnu Smith? I mean, could we actually be living in a world where Travis Kelce is a borderline tight end 1? Because that does seem pretty crazy to me.
I think he's in the range that you just talked about. And again, like we'll just kind of we'll work through it some more as the offseason goes. But I think the guys that you named ahead of him, I'm with you. I feel really comfortable about them being at the top of the list. I do think you could make an argument for any of those guys, right? If Jonnu Smith is back, right, in Miami, I mean, dude, like, it's hard to ignore what he did down the stretch. Do we think that's just suddenly not going to be there? So I wouldn't blame someone if they wanted to take Jonnu over Travis Kelce. A lot of those guys you mentioned, David Njoku, I'm probably going with Kelce. I know we're going to talk more about the Browns and their quarterback situation here in a minute, but obviously that's a big part for Njoku because when we haven't had, whether it was Jameis Winston or Joe Flacco under center, it hasn't been good for Njoku for the last 2 years. So I could see going Kelce over him, but we'll see what the Browns do at quarterback. But I think that probably is the tier of the guys that we would be talking about.
Not to go completely off the rails, Dwayne, but do you get at all like Tyler Higbee vibes kind of with Jonnu, those couple years where like the Rams offense wasn't working, but down the stretch, we just saw these really big numbers, in the final 4 to 6 weeks, even though that probably wasn't, direction that they really wanted to go. I think Jonnu's a better, yak creator than Higbee for sure. Better overall player, I would even say. But I just get nervous when we have these underperforming offenses sprucing up a tight end, force feeding him targets when, look, I still don't think that was exactly where McDaniel and even Tua necessarily wanted to go all the time.
Yeah, I feel you, and it all just depend on like where the guy goes as far as ADP. But the good thing about Jonnu is we've always liked his talent profile. So he's always been a guy that we felt if he could get a little bit more work, he could do the sort of things we saw. He's in a scheme that's very innovative. Obviously, McDaniel has some work that he's got to do because the league has adapted to a lot of the things that he's doing. And so his counterpunch became Jonnu Smith. So we're not so sure that it won't be more Jonnu Smith next year unless, he has some more tricks up his sleeve and, he actually, evolves the offense again. And if he does, that could take some things away from Jonnu, because I'll say this, like, I don't think Jonnu is like such a good player that he's just should be taking away targets from Tyreek Hill as well as Jalen Waddle. Those are good players too. So I do definitely think that there's some risk, but I will say this, like Jonnu Smith is a guy that we for a long time thought, like, the athleticism is there. We had seen it in flashes whenever, he had been given the opportunity. We saw it again last year. So at least look, he's in play, but I can't necessarily argue against you, right? Having some concerns that he could fall flat in 2025 as they just return the offensive keys back over to Waddle and Hill.
As Jason Witten would say, we'll see if McDaniel has, another rabbit to pull out of his head here ahead of 25. So more news, though, from the Combine, guys, right after a quick word from our friends over at Bud Light.
Hey, you're not actually allowed to drink in a beer commercial?
Since when?
You gotta wait till it's done. Oh,
5,
4, 3, 2, 1.
Colts general manager Chris Ballard said that Indy will have a quote-unquote an open competition between Anthony Richardson and a quarterback the team brings in during the offseason. Now, Dwain, we also had a real nice article on ESPN from Jeremy Fowler and Dan Graziano talking about things they heard from the combine, and they echoed this point, but actually gave us some names that appear to be on the Colts radar. Daniel Jones, Justin Fields, Trey Lance, and the guy that I wrote as my wish, purely to get Anthony Richardson the job, Jacoby Brissett. So thought it was interesting that Fowler basically, said what we're all thinking, Dwain. Who they end up bringing in is going to more or less tell us a lot about how they actually view Anthony Richardson. So someone like Lance or Jacoby Brissett, probably not too worried about, taking the over on the amount of games that Richardson is going to be starting. God forbid, though, they make a big push for, Sam Darnold or just bring in, the Russell Wilson, Aaron Rodgers type. That is where I get a bit more worried. So really, again, we kind of have these 7 or 8 teams that have this big open hole at quarterback. Would expect them to be the teams that, again, are going, a bit harder in the paint for someone like Darnold. But Colts are a sneaky team. And again, I think their kind of level of free agency interest in some of these guys going to tell us a lot about what they think about Richardson as their potential future QB.
Yeah, if they sign Sam Darnold, if they sign Aaron Rodgers, I'll be scared to death. If they sign Russell Wilson, I'll be scared, not scared to death, but I would be scared. I think any of those names land there, and there's a real problem because you're talking about a coaching staff and a GM that probably feels like they're on the hot seat anyway. And so they're not just going to be thinking about letting Anthony Richardson play for the long term. They're also thinking about their jobs. And, if you're thinking about your jobs, you're going to have to be thinking about how do we just get a W this week? And if they don't think Anthony Richardson can do that, that's obviously going to put them at great risk. From fantasy perspective, like Richardson's the only one I would really be interested in. Not that you couldn't take one of the others late in the draft. Sam Darnold obviously just proved, right, that he played well, and they've got some pretty nice weapons in Indianapolis, so we would be okay with that. But Richardson, to your point, is the one that could be the difference maker. We know he was completely terrible last year, guys. He had a quarterback rating of 61.6, talking about a guy's PFF pass grade was 59.8. In case you don't know, that's pretty terrible. You guys have all heard the completion percentage stuff, under 50%. So pretty much everything as a passer just was bad last year for Anthony Richardson. Didn't look like a professional NFL quarterback other than his stature and the way that he can run. So a lot of work to do here for Richardson. But as you and I know, if you just even if with just the rushing alone and sucking as a passer, you can still score a lot of fantasy points. And if there's some chance that he suddenly got better as a passer, I'm old enough to remember, Ian, when Josh Allen sucked. And there was no way anyone would have ever thought Josh Allen would have had that turnaround. I'm old enough to remember when Jalen Hurts sucked, and no one thought he would ever. Now, he regressed this past year, but he also has had multiple 300-yard passing games between the time that everybody thought he sucked and getting to this last season. So I think you just got to remember, and be open to things improving. We're not saying it's going to, but he still has the ingredients, man, that if it did run right for Anthony Richardson, he could really be a fantasy difference maker. But if they sign any of those quarterbacks that we talked about, the big ones, it's going to be a real problem. And that's going to make it super tough. Like, say you're talking about best ball, where like Anthony Richardson, you don't have to know when his weeks that he's going to blow up are going to come from. But if you don't know that he's going to even start 10 games, that starts to make it really difficult figuring out how you're going to handle your exposure to Anthony Richardson.
Adding fuel to the fire is the reality that Josh Allen himself is actually going to be working out with Anthony Richardson this offseason. He will now be also working with Josh Allen's, quarterback guru. Of course he is indeed. So again, I don't want to be out on the guy just yet because we have seen those flashes on the ground to the point that he's averaged the second most fantasy points per game from rushing production behind only Jalen Hurts over the course of these past 2 seasons. So I know a bit of a roller coaster passing, but even some of those completion percentage numbers, when you're throwing the ball as far downfield on a per attempt basis as Richardson, they are, of course, going to be skewed, a bit harder to have that 60% plus completion rate. But end of the day, Dwain, don't give up on the guy just yet because he doesn't even turn 23 years old until May. Shedeur Sanders and Cam Ward, yes, are in fact, older than Anthony Richardson at this point in time. So we'll see what happens in Indy. But again, one of the, quarterback spots where they might have their starter, but also wouldn't be shocking if they go ahead and make a big move. However, that big move will not be for one Derek Carr. We do have word from Saints GM Mickey Loomis saying that he does feel the team can win with Derek Carr. Even had Nick Underhill basically stating that his his meeting with Kellen Moore went well. And it sounds like, again, that they should be a pair, and we'll have Carr, under center in week 1. So not completely confirmed just yet. But Dwain, again, I'm on the record. Derek Carr doesn't like me, okay? He blocked me on Twitter, probably had a good reason for doing so a long time ago. But I really think that, teams, for as much shit as Derek Carr continually gets out here, as much as people just say, yeah, throw out the first 2 weeks of last year and he's dirt average, he just had arguably, the second best season of his career. It was right up there with what he did with John Gruden in 2019 and 2020, even the 2016, semi-fraudulent MVP campaign, but still, an all-in-all pretty good year. I mean, he was 11th out of 40 quarterbacks in terms of EPA per dropback. He had the 4th highest PFF passing grade. And you can say, okay, what do you do after the first 2 weeks of the season? Well, when you lose Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed and half your offensive line is banged up, what exactly do you expect? I don't think Derek Carr is that bad, Dwain. Shoot me.
Yeah, I mean, he's a below average NFL quarterback, but he's an NFL quarterback. I mean, he's a guy that I do think that you can put on the field. If you surround him with a good team, you could do some things. Like, I don't think that he's going to bring everybody up with him, but to your point, it was one of his best years of his career. 101 quarterback rating. That's the second best mark for his career. You talked about the PFF pass grade, 86.7. That's the second best of his career. You got to go back to 2017. He had an 87.2 with the Raiders. So yeah, a lot of good things. Touchdowns per pass attempt, 5.4%. That was actually a career high for him. Actually, sorry, 2017 was 5.6%, so just a little bit higher. But like you mentioned, near career highs and all these different things, and he did it without having any weapons. All these guys were hurt pretty much for the second half of the season. These guys were all out. It'll be interesting to see, what does Kellen Moore do? How does he want to design this offense? Because we've seen two different extremes from Kellen Moore. We saw him whenever he was with the Chargers, even before that with the Cowboys. Really, with the Chargers, it was air things out. With the Cowboys, more of a balanced offense, but did have some real pass-heavy years in there. Then you come over to the Eagles, it turns into this run-heavy team. Just looking at the pieces that they have in play right now, assuming that they've got Olave, you got Rashid Shaheed, get those guys back on the field. You got an aging running back in Alvin Kamara. So I feel like they could lean a little bit more to the passing, but they could use some of those concepts that they used in Philadelphia, really some of the concepts that honestly worked last year for Derek Carr for the Saints. Keep some of those things, maybe not go to a complete air it out kind of thing, because it's clear Carr did like that. Carr liked playing with the play action. He was doing well. And that was something he had struggled with earlier in his career, was never a great play action passer, but it worked out well for him last year. Maybe take a little bit of the pressure off of him with some more design and scheme type stuff. I know Clint Kubiak ended up, looking really bad. It looked good, like you said, just like Carr. He looked really great early in the season. And then as the entire offense got hurt, that also tends to hurt the offensive coordinator as well. So yeah, when I look at Carr, we're not going to get excited about drafting him in fantasy, but I do think he's good enough to support Chris Olave. I think he's good enough for us to feel okay about Rashid Shaheed.
Now, I know what Saints fans are thinking. Hey, yeah, why those wide receivers get hurt? You can talk about Derek Carr's, hospital balls, especially to Chris Olave. But again, really tough thing to quantify. I think sometimes we just have, one or two bad examples stick out in our head, and maybe that ends up clouding the whole argument. So, Dwain, what would be a good way to calculate hospital balls? Middle of the field, 10 to 20 yards, air yards, off target rate? That might get us something.
It might get us something, but even then, I think you're going to have that. I think that's one, honestly, you're going to have to watch the film. You'd have to understand what the quarterback's seeing with the coverage. So what they're expecting the coverage to do. And then the whole, that the wide receivers entering in, there's going to be some that are super obvious where you're okay, if you're the quarterback and you're seeing the coverage this way, and you know what the wide receiver's doing, you shouldn't be throwing that ball. But I think it would be pretty difficult, even for someone that really understands football and the way coverages work. I can't think of anything off the top of my head where I feel like I could go run data and get a really good, feel for it. I think to your point, you could probably narrow the plays down that way and get down to less that you got to go watch. So that might be a good way to start, but I think you would have to lay eyes on the film for it.
Because it really is tough sometimes. You see a player running and we don't know, what their communication is. Okay, if you're wide open in middle field, are you supposed to run through that? Or are you supposed to sit? And then when the quarterback and him are not on the same page, I guess that goes in the books as an off target, pass, even though it very well could have been on the wide receiver in the first place. So, hey, it's only March 3rd as we record that. Give Dwain and I a little bit of time to get in the lab. Maybe we'll come up with something here down the stretch.
That could be a combo project. If there was ever a combo project for me and you, which we haven't technically done. Like we've never done like a co-authored kind of thing. So maybe we'll have to, put it in the oven, let it well, we don't want to burn it, but we'll have to kind of let it get, we'll see if it warms up enough that we actually want to do it. We'll see what happens. That was a terrible analogy. Let's move forward.
Let's move forward with ESPN's Adam Schefter saying that he is, quote unquote, confident in the Browns selecting a quarterback at number 2 overall. Maybe not, again, the most shocking revelation, but just trying to read between the lines. Meanwhile, Jeremy Fowler also reported that Daniel Jones is on the Browns' radar, as is Kirk Cousins, and even, wait for it, yes, Mr. Carson Wentz as well. So certainly seems like, Dwain, we're going to see the Browns in the market for both Cam Ward or more likely at number 2, Shedeur Sanders. Maybe we end up seeing Jackson Dart or, Tyler Schote, I believe his name is. One of these other guys may be coming up. We'll see, how much heat there actually is with Shedeur Sanders and some of the rumors that he could be falling. But again, whoever rookie they take at number 2, it does seem like they're going to go hand in hand with more of a veteran passer. So Kirk Cousins was someone we talked about a couple weeks ago, maybe being that natural guy the Browns could get on a cheap deal if the Falcons are down to get rid of him. But all of a sudden that, doesn't seem like an absolute certainty out here. So end of the day, we're not expecting any of these quarterbacks to all of a sudden lead the Browns to contention. Sorry, Cleveland fans, but again, you still owe Deshaun Watson $92 million. A lot of holes on this offense. We just need someone to hopefully be able to exist between getting the snap and getting the ball to Jerry Jeudy, David Njoku, and maybe even Cedric Tillman. But unfortunately, Dwain, I just read a lot of names out there. I'm not very confident in any of them helping, Jeudy continue partying like he did with Jameis.
Yeah, I mean, no one's going to help Jeudy party like he did with Jameis, but it could make Jeudy draftable, especially in best ball. Like if he's got a quarterback right now, like you don't want to click on any of these names. Even David Njoku, as amazing as he has been for stretches, if you feel like Deshaun Watson is going to be the guy, and obviously Deshaun Watson's hurt, so it might be Dorian Thompson-Robinson. We have to have something better than that to make it where we're willing to actually click on the name at all. I don't see any of these moves that we just talked about being like these massive upgrades where we're suddenly, to your point, excited about drafting Jeudy, Njoku, Cedric Tillman, but they do make them draftable. That makes it where it's a situation where you could get a few weeks out of these players, especially if at any point, like the offense condenses due to injury, where it's really just Njoku and Cedric Tillman and Jerry Jeudy misses a few games. Not that we're wanting Jerry Jeudy to miss games, but in an offense where it gets condensed down to 1 or 2 players being fed by someone like a Kirk Cousins, and obviously Kirk Cousins, we'll talk about him in a minute, news that he might be staying with Atlanta. But any of those upgrades over Deshaun Watson, it's just all relative. Deshaun Watson is so bad that all of those would be upgrades and at least make those guys draftable. I think Cam Ward would honestly be the most exciting one. We know he's an unknown, but he could also be really good. So, I mean, like he's the one that might push the ceiling the highest for those guys. Obviously, he would have to do his part and perform really well as a rookie, which we both know is not that easy to do in the NFL.
Let's try to stay optimistic, Dwayne. It is March after all. Maybe all Watson needed was to just tear his Achilles twice, and that'll kind of bring back the best version of him. Let's just stay optimistic and, yeah, exactly. Hope that that's all he needed. But you mentioned Kirk Cousins. We do have some news on him. Falcons general manager Terry Fontenot did say the team would keep Kirk Cousins as a backup to Penix. It is a situation where he could just be saying that, and they're trying to get, a pay cut or a contract restructure. But again, just based on kind of all the money they're going to owe Cousins in the first place, it might be in their best interest to try to get him to stay along as a backup, as opposed to paying for his contract for him to go somewhere else, a la what the Broncos had to do with Russell Wilson last season. So not going to be a quarterback controversy. It is going to be the Michael Penix Jr. show, and we did see flashes down the stretch of last season. Dwayne, they just keep Cousins, and maybe for those 2 games against the Buccaneers, trot him out there and have him re-embrace that form over there. So all jokes aside, it is a little bit concerning, and I know we mentioned this previously, but you would think, just based on, again, how rough things look with Kirk Cousins and, some of the promise that Penix showed, you would think when you look at their numbers side by side that there'd be a big gulf. But sorry to tell you guys, Cousins was still the more efficient passer in more of these metrics than not. So I know another year, and I see the flashes with Penix. He just came in at the end of the season. But I would just caution, Dwayne, expecting this Falcons offense to take a huge leap forward just because of the QB change.
Right. I mean, I think the big theory, like with Penix, is we do know that he has the arm strength to potentially open up more things. But arm strength is just one part of the equation, like the anticipation and understanding the defense, being on the same page with your wide receivers. There's so much going on. I mean, you have to give one major hat tip to Kirk Cousins and how we saw this all come into play, man. It's a career year for Darnell Mooney. Like, Darnell Mooney looked like a complete different player getting to play with a guy like Kirk Cousins. So, not saying that Penix wouldn't be the better option, but I do agree with you. Whenever I've looked at the data, I'm like, hey, this is just way closer at a minimum than what people thought. So I think the big takeaway here is if Kirk Cousins does stay in Atlanta, that's not a bad thing for fantasy, because now you know you have at least two potential options, right? If you're going to have a Drake London on your team, maybe you're going to take Darnell Mooney. I know we're not going to say the KP. It's just going to use initials, KP. Not going to say the name on that one, because I know, like, we've been saying it for too long. But any of these Falcons that you're investing in, if Kirk Cousins does stay, it's an insurance policy, man. Do we all expect him to come out and be, Kirk Cousins that we saw like in 2019 or 18? No, but he could be better than last year, Ian. Being another year removed from the Achilles, like, that really could go a long way for Cousins. We don't know for sure. So I think there's a chance that he actually plays better. So I like this if you're investing in Falcons. I do think it's an insurance policy, even if we don't think Cousins is as good as he once was.
Again, neither of us saying that Cousins is still this top 20, top 15 quarterback or anything like that. But would it be the most shocking thing if he's still top 30? Closer to 30. I think it could potentially be on the table. And again, would be, to Dwayne's point, great insurance policy for all these guys. So Drake London, certainly someone that's going to be costing you a pretty round 1 or round 2 pick here in August drafts. Certainly not bad to have, again, a quarterback that we know can at least get him up into that upside wide receiver 2 range at worst, even if QB1 goes down. Let's talk about one more quarterback situation. Dwayne, we do have Steelers general manager Omar Khan saying he would like to re-sign one of Justin Fields or Russell Wilson this offseason. Meanwhile, ESPN's Jeremy Fowler reported that the sense he gets is that Fields does have an edge over Russ in the Steelers' free agent quarterback pecking order. So, hey, Justin Fields, I understand, doesn't have, the quickest internal clock, leaves a lot to be desired in terms of his accuracy sometimes. But also, we saw him in a Bears organization that has, enabled, 0 good quarterbacks in the last 30 or 40 years. Starting to wonder if maybe the Y variable has something to do with that, going on there. Dwayne, same thing in Cleveland, for instance. But also with Fields, the other thing we've seen is him consistently be awesome at running, which again leads to plenty of fantasy points. Last 3 years, he's been the QB5, QB11, and yes, in Pittsburgh, QB8 in terms of fantasy points per game. So for, just again, sake of argument, we really have 3 teams that have emerged as potentially likely suitors for Fields. The Jets are rumored to be in the market. Obviously, the Steelers that we just mentioned, and maybe the Raiders with Chip Kelly, obviously being, a nice fit with some of his RPO, QB run friendly schematics going on there. So out of those 3, Dwayne, is there a preference for you?
I don't know. Look, I think Justin Fields is going to score fantasy points if he gets on the field wherever he's at. I don't think it's going to matter. Obviously, each one of those places has some things that you like about it because each of them has some weapons, right? If you go to the Raiders, you've got Brock Bowers. We've talked about Jacoby Myers. If you go over to the Jets, we've got Garrett Wilson. We'll see what else happens there. Sounds like Devontae Adams is going to be on the move or end up being cut. So if you look at Fields, I think he's going to be someone that's going to score fantasy points and be in a good spot with any one of those places. I think the bigger issue is what's the fallout for the weapons? Because if you have Justin Fields, maybe we would have the college connection back for Garrett Wilson, and Justin Fields. But if you've got Justin Fields playing, with the Jets, we're not going to like Garrett Wilson as much. Now, again, we don't even know for sure who the quarterback is going to be at all for the Jets. So it's kind of impossible to say that, but we would prefer it be a Sam Darnold or someone like that. If you talk about the Raiders, I'm going to feel less for Brock Bowers, but at the same time, I'm probably not going to make a huge downgrade because we're talking right now about Aiden O'Connell and Gardner Minshew. So the problem with Justin Fields for the pass catchers is how many of those dropbacks now turn into scrambles. Also, it's the incentive for the head coaching staff to say, well, basically this is another running back, so I could run the ball even more. They feel like they've got 3 backs they can use. So what can often happen is the play calls lean more into running the ball, and then you get more of the passes turned into scrambles, which also end up as run plays. So it just shrinks the pie for everyone. And we know that Justin Fields, the big challenge with Justin Fields, in my opinion, Ian, it's not that he can't ever pass the ball well. He has certain games where it's absolutely horrid. and he just gets on a major cold streak and, man, just cannot get anything going. And so you have to stomach those big, huge downturn weeks, from the weapons that play around him. So now, having said all that, we did get a year from DJ Moore just 2 years ago where most of it came from Justin Fields, and he was awesome. He was better than he was last year with Caleb Williams. So I don't want to completely dump on Justin Fields because we have seen him support someone. But at the same time, we know that there are quarterback issues here with Fields. And I think we would have to consider that to be a potential downgrade for any of the pass catchers. Justin Fields himself, he's going to do his thing because he likes to run the ball. Last 3 seasons, you mentioned it, but 20.6, 19, and 17.4 fantasy points per game.
And I don't want to give up on someone that we know has the talent too early, okay? I understand the mental side of football. You can say that's 90% of the problem. I understand that. But if you don't have the 10% physical traits, you might not make it at all. And we do know Fields has that as a rusher and, yes, even as a passer. Dwain, I tend to have a little bit of fun on the old Twitter sphere from time to time. But I kid you not, first half against the Falcons last year, before the halftime hit there at the end, they dialed up a little roll to his left. And from the hash, through 45 yards all the way to the other sideline to George Pickens. It was literally identical to the throw that defined, it was at the top of every John Elway highlight film from back in his days in Denver. So I understand, difference in eras and all that going on. John Elway today would be incredible. Justin Fields is not John Elway, but man, looking at Fields versus Clemson, Olave, he's getting behind the defense. We know we can throw the ball. Again, more times than not, it's just, having hiccups in the accuracy department and sometimes, again, not getting through his processes as fast as you would prefer. So personally, I'd love to see the Raiders. I think he would fit perfectly in with what Chip Kelly wants to do because, again, if you can just get Fields working on time and in that structure, really think that, there's a much higher ceiling than we've seen to this point. Yes, I am a Buckeyes diehard, Columbus, Ohio faithful. Go Bucks! I hope it works out for that reason as well.
Would you downgrade Brock Bowers if Justin Fields goes to the Raiders? Right now, Brock Bowers is, if you guys haven't seen, you got to take him at the end of round 2 in fantasy drafts, sometimes in the middle of round 2, which Ian and I have talked about. It's probably about fair when you start looking at the receivers in that range. You can make some arguments, but would you move him to being more of a round 3 pick if Justin Fields lands there?
Yeah,
you can just be a Buckeye fan and say no. It's okay. It's March.
It's not even to do with that. It's more so Trey McBride, but that shouldn't give me complete reason to be out on Bowers. The reason I'm out on Bowers in round 2 is because I can get Trey McBride in round 3. That doesn't necessarily mean that Bowers can't work out in round 2. So no, but I don't think projections. If I was making our projections and all of a sudden we know Fields is going to be the quarterback instead of AOC and Minshew, I don't think I'd change Bowers' projection.
You would change it? They're going to go down. Well, it's going to go down a little bit because of the things we talked about. You're going to anticipate more running plays and then the scrambles that turn passes into run plays. So the volume is going to go down. It's not that you're going to change, Brock Bowers' target share, right? It's just the overall complexion of the offense changes.
But you wouldn't change his yards per target he's projected to earn.
Well, it does funnel down, but it wouldn't be as big of an impact as some people might think. Yeah. I mean, and we do have, Chip Kelly, and he's going to scheme it up. So, and to your point, Justin Fields would be a good fit with what Chip Kelly can do really well.
We will, I'm sure, Dwain, talk about this plenty more times this offseason, as we will with the Minnesota Vikings quarterback room. We do have the Star Tribune's Ben Gosling reporting that J.J. McCarthy has his sights set on being ready for the start of the Vikings offseason program in April. So had that pesky, second knee surgery pop up, last November, I believe it was, that gave me personally some cause for concern. However, it did not change his timeline. And again, looks like he will be ready to go by then. So, man, Dwain, McCarthy just turned 22 in January. I mean, he is going to be the NFL's youngest starting QB if he is ready to go by week 1, which seems like the case. I mean, I know we were talking, some of our preseason reaction pods last year about just how impressive he looked in that game against the Raiders. I mean, Kevin O'Connell has gotten Nick freaking Mullins to average, north of 8 yards per attempt here. With McCarthy, again, could Darnold return? Sure, that's a kind of a problem for a different day, but let's just assume for a moment that McCarthy locked in as the Vikings week 1 starter. Where do you think he could, lie around guys like CJ Stroud, Trevor Lawrence, and Michael Penix? Because again, if we've learned one thing over the last 2 seasons, is that the Vikings are seemingly pretty capable of putting up big time numbers regardless of who is under center.
Of course, as soon as we say that, they won't. Like, and I'm not trying to, I'm with you. I want to stay optimistic. We're in March, try to save some of the pessimism as we start to really dig in things in May and June. But I mean, we've talked about this article that theoretically I could write where we could write it either way. Oh man, you don't got to worry about that here. And then, that'll be the year that it actually happens. So like, it's a question mark. Like Sam Darnold, if he's back, at least you just saw him do it. You know what I mean? Now, Sam Darnold heading into last year, we didn't have confidence in. We grew in the confidence around Sam Darnold as the offseason went on, and we actually bumped him up a few times in our ranks and our projections, and I think we ended up being pretty good on that. But at the same time, like McCarthy, man, there's a lot of unknowns. The other thing is McCarthy, part of what he does is his athleticism. Even though he didn't run all the time at Michigan, he is a good athlete, and you wonder if that could be something that really helps him out at the pro level. But with him coming off of the surgeries, like, is he going to really be able to use that part of his game? So I tend to side with you. I lean towards trusting Kevin O'Connell. It's not going to change the way you're going to feel about Justin Jefferson, right? Because I mean, Justin Jefferson's a great player. You got to take him in the top 6 picks. That's just the way it is. Like, but if you wanted to take a CeeDee Lamb or a Puka over Justin Jefferson because you are a little bit worried about the quarterback, look, last year people did that for Jamar Chase, and even though Sam Darnold, ended up being, good, it still worked out for you. You had Jamar Chase over Justin Jefferson. So I mean, look, they're all really good players. You're not gonna you could talk about pushing Justin Jefferson to the bottom of that tier. I think the bigger question is, what would it do to Jordan Addison? What would it do to TJ Hawkinson if JJ McCarthy doesn't come through? And I feel like this is sacrilege even saying this because, I follow Thor on Twitter, and like Thor has got you have some great bits going in, but I think maybe the greatest bit going on Twitter right now is Thor every day pumping up JJ McCarthy. And JJ McCarthy actually loves Thor. I think JJ McCarthy is now following Thor. So yeah, look, I'll just say this. I know I've kind of rambled here. It's hard to say, man. We don't know what's going to happen with J.J. McCarthy. All we can say is he was a first-round pick, and Kevin O'Connell has had really good offenses. So to that extent, I think we have to trust it.
I do wonder too, like if we because from what we heard, guys like Dane Brugler and stuff have said that McCarthy would be ranked higher than Ward or Shedeur Sanders. Like, how would our perception of McCarthy change if he was just the number 1 overall pick in this year's draft and he went to the Vikings? I'd be probably feeling a little better about him, as I'm sure a lot of other people would as well. So in general, though, I do want to lean towards believing, and maybe it is, Thor just getting in my head after I did, go ahead and publish my QB tiers article. Thor texted me and said, I'm too low on McCarthy. He is going to be top 10 in fantasy this year. So again, certainly in the right environment, in the right scheme, and should have plenty of chances to make Thor's dream a reality. We are rooting for him as well. So good stuff there, Dwain. Let's move on to a quick running back note, though. We talked about Mike McDaniel and Jonnu Smith a little bit earlier. McDaniel, though, was talking about his running back room and referred to it as incomplete. Now Raheem Mostert is out of the picture, leaving Devon Achane and Jalen Wright to form the lead tandem. And again, we have committees all over the NFL in the year 2025. We can live with 2 backs, but things do get a bit more complicated when you have 3 or 4. So with Achane, look, I'd be shocked if he's going to be, anywhere close to this place as a lead back. Just racked up 281 touches last season. Going to be someone off the board in round 1 or round 2 of drafts. But Jalen Wright, Dwayne, someone that if he can get by these next 2 months of minimal competition, could be a fast riser as well.
Yeah, Jalen Wright, is the guy right now with Raheem Mostert out. With him being cut, Jalen Wright could be a running back 1 as soon as week 1 if something happened to Devon Achane. So that changes if obviously they're thinking about taking a running back. This is a very deep class when we talk about the running back. So you could talk about someone coming in round 4. I don't think the Dolphins even they don't have to spend a pick in round 2, round 3. They can wait till round 4, potentially even round 5, depending on how long some of these guys last. That could be legit competition. For the running back 2 position. Or to your point, it just gets split between 2 guys. It's not one guy or the other taking it. It's really just a challenge because Jalen Wright has to share that role with somebody else. So this is one I really want to keep an eye on. It is interesting. They're like, come on, man. The Dolphins need so many things. Is running back really one of them? I mean, look, I guess it's fine if you spend a 5th round pick and you got a deep class and you get a guy that would have normally been a round 4 or a round 3 running back just because, there's so many running backs in the class. So I could understand it from that aspect. But man, when I think about the Dolphins, I don't feel like they're one more running back away. I thought Matt Harmon had a great tweet. He tweeted out with showing McDaniel in the stands, watching the running backs run, and above it he just puts one more really fast running back away from it all coming together. I mean, I think that's kind of funny. Like, you already have the fast running backs, and you could probably just sign some okay free agent to be your running back 3. But if there is a coach, Mike McDaniel is the one, Ian, that we have to look at and say it won't surprise us at all, like if he takes another running back in this draft.
Even as a combine hater, I am someone who, realizes there are a lot of really impressive, heavier running backs putting some, elite 40 times on tape here over the weekend. That said, good note from Zara Consabedian. Sorry if I messed up your name, bro. At ZCantsFF on Twitter. Jalen Wright's speed and burst scores would have ranked second if he actually was in this year's draft class. So yes, he was a 4th round pick last year, but the Dolphins did trade, I believe, this year's 3rd round pick to get him in the first place. Maybe we'll have a big opportunity for more here in 2025. So last one, Dwain, we did get a note from Bengals executive Duke Tobin saying that Jamar Chase will be the number 1 highest paid non-quarterback in the NFL. He also says he's optimistic about retaining T. Higgins, who has now, officially, I believe, actually been hit with the franchise tag. Even, went ahead and tweeted before our show, tag. You're it, I guess. So, Dwain, overall thoughts on the Bengals, maybe for once not being the cheapest organization in the NFL and getting their pair of baller wide receivers re-signed.
Yeah, could have got a lot of this done sooner and probably saved yourself some money, Bengals, and you got more room to do other things. But yes, hat tip, you're at least going to get this done with Jamar Chase. Obviously, we don't have like dried ink or anything on that, but it's good to hear this. I don't really have a ton to add here, Ian. Like Joe Burrow, I think is, the biggest thing here, getting his weapons back. Like you could see him being as high as like the QB3 in fantasy. He's not the guy that's going to give you that mobility that some of the other guys do. But if there's anyone out here that we look at and we're like, yeah, they could throw 45, 50 touchdowns in a weird year, it's Joe Burrow. Like Joe Burrow is the top of that list. So I really do like Burrow. And he goes after a lot of the elite dual. He goes after all the elite dual threat guys. So you get a little bit of a discount on him. But like Jamar Chase, I don't know. What do you want me to say? Jamar Chase is really good at football. He's going to be really good at football again. T. Higgins, same thing.
Naturally, after Tobin said that, we got a report from Diana Rossini saying that Chase and the Bengals are, quote unquote, far apart on their deal. So just totally normal stuff happening here in Cincy, as always, with their contract negotiations. But hopefully they're on the field because Lord knows, very, very fun offense to watch when they have all parties involved. But that's going to do it from Dwain and myself on this edition of the Fantasy Live Show. We'll be back, with various parties the rest of the week, though. Always a great day to talk ball here over with Team Fantasy Live. So for Dwain, for producer Matt, for producer Kelce, I'm Ian. Thanks again for tuning in. Until next time, take care, everybody.